So, Israel has been attacked by Hamas. It's been all over the news, it's been all over social media, and I have been seeing mixed responses from a couple of different groups that is a little discouraging, to say the least. So, I wanted to do a brief video just addressing the response that we should have, really the only correct response to the terrorist attacks that happened this weekend. So, by now, you've probably seen at least some of the footage that's been put out, but if you haven't, I would actually encourage you to watch it if you have a chance, or some of it, because it's disturbing, but it's important to understand what it is that we're talking about and what it is that we're mobilizing against when it comes to the response to the attack from this weekend. This is the worst kind of attack that I believe we've seen in this generation. I mean, it goes back to the kinds of things that the Nazis were doing during World War II, and that's not an exaggeration. At this point, last I looked, the numbers are there's over 1,000 Israelis dead. Many of those were women, children, civilians, not military combatants. 14 Americans died, as well as multiple Americans taken as hostages. There's something like 100 to 150 hostages taken total, and there's thousands of people that have been wounded by the bombs and the shooting and everything else. And the dead include, when the IDF pushed Hamas out of a village, they found a daycare that had over 40 babies that had been killed in their cribs, some of them decapitated. So this is the kind of depravity that we're talking about. It was not a military maneuver against another military. It wasn't a group of fighters engaging in guerrilla warfare against a larger force. It was acts of terrorism. The target was civilians. It wasn't military bases. There were military bases that were hit, but that was just to get to the main target, which is Israeli citizens. Once they got to them, there was murder. They went house to house, murdering families. There was rape. There was mutilation. There was everything unimaginable that you could think of was being done to the Israeli citizens, and not just the men, but the women, the children, babies, elderly. It was a terrorist attack. To think of it as anything else would be just wrong. And amazingly, there's a not insignificant group of people that are just kind of shrugging their shoulders at all of this and saying, well, there's a land war going on and Israel is the dominant power over there, and so the Hamas has to engage in tactics like this. Just unacceptable excusing and trying to make a moral equivalence between Israel, a sovereign nation, attempting to combat Hamas, a terrorist group who puts civilians out in front of them as a shield, and what they are doing to Israel. To call for Israel to negotiate or show restraint is simply being a terrorist sympathizer at this point. Either you're ignorant of what has happened over the weekend and the actual atrocities that were happening, or you're willfully siding with evil. There's not really another way to go about trying to understand people who are excusing that kind of behavior. And by that kind of behavior, I mean pure evil. And the only correct response to pure evil like that is to annihilate it. And that seems to be what Israel is planning on doing. However, I'd just like to point out a couple of things to the Americans that are kind of shrugging their shoulders and taking a hands-off approach to this. One is that if we're truly Americans and we stand for the values of the West, which would be Judeo-Christian values at their core, but the values of freedom and liberty and democracy, that's what Israel stands for. They're an ally of ours. And so if an ally of ours gets attacked, and an ally that holds the same values as we do as a country, that shouldn't be something that we're indifferent to. It's not something that we just kind of shrug and go about our business. It's something that should elicit some kind of response from us as well. If you look at all the surrounding nations, certainly the group of people that attacked Israel this weekend, they stand for the opposite of American values, certainly Christian values, but I'm not even talking about the religious aspect of it, because that's one of the things that people are saying is, oh, the only people that are upset about this are religious people, particularly dispensationalists, which we'll get to later. But I'm not making a religious case. I'm making a case just based on the values of our culture, our country, and the fact that Israel is one of our strongest allies and the most stabilizing force over in the Middle East. Just look at their rules of engagement that they use against Hamas up until this point. There's no equivalency between what Hamas does, specifically target civilians, and not just any civilians, but the most vulnerable, women and children and elderly, and what Israel does when they attempt to combat Hamas. Israel will call the buildings that they're about to bomb because they know that Hamas hides underneath populated areas. And so they'll call, warn them to get out. Then they'll send a bomb that doesn't go off. It just hits the building and shakes it. And again, warns them that they're about to be struck with a real bomb. And then after that is when they finally will drop a bomb if they do that. And the only reason that people stay inside is because Hamas makes them, because Hamas wants dead bodies so that they could point the finger at Israel, when really all that blood is on the hands of Hamas, not Israel. Same with this counterstrike that's coming up that Israel's already begun to do. War is nasty and innocent people die in war, and that's why we shouldn't want war. But that's what's going to happen in the Gaza Strip now because of what Hamas done. And so to point the finger at Israel and say, well, it's their fault, is just completely ignorant of the way that wars work. No other country in the present or in the past has ever showed the kind of restraint that Israel does when it comes to their rules of engagement against these people. So if we're going to be Americans that stand for the values that America stands for, if we're going to be a country that's worth being an ally with, who will respond when their allies are struck, we shouldn't be indifferent to a country that is one of our strongest allies, who shares the values of our country and who is being attacked by terrorists. That shouldn't be something that we just kind of shrug about. And now to Christians showing indifference, which this surprises me a lot more. Apparently, there's people that are taking this as an opportunity to take shots at dispensationalists about weird allegiances to Israel because of them being the chosen people of God. If you watch the videos of men and particularly women and children being mutilated and killed and their bodies being paraded around, and your reaction is to start slinging mud at people that have different theology than you about end times things, let me suggest that you're wildly out of touch and your conscience has been extremely seared. This should be something that's easy for Christians to unify around, condemn, and call for action against. To take this as an opportunity to start insulting other Christians about their theology, or to start bashing the Jewish nation because they're Christ deniers, which is literally something that I saw in a post. First of all, if you're a Christian and you claim that Christ is the Lord of your life, how do you think that he would respond to something like this? I know that there are people that have different views on God's chosen people at this time. Is it still the nation of Israel in some way? Has it been moved to the church exclusively and it's no longer the nation of Israel? We can disagree on the theology behind that, but that shouldn't change our reaction to the atrocities that are being committed against innocent people right now. As Christians, we should be standing for godliness and standing against evil wherever it manifests. And if you're so preoccupied with insulting dispensationalists at a time like this, having a reaction like that is a result of just being completely isolated within your own world and incapable of seeing outside of it. And as a result of that, everything gets poured through this filter of how can I use this to make myself feel better about my own beliefs? And again, for people that are calling for talks and negotiations, if you watch the footage of what the terrorists are doing to Israel, going house to house, executing families, kidnapping women and children, raping, mutilating, parading dead bodies around in public, if you look at that and your response is, well, maybe they could be reasoned with, then I would suggest that you are so blind and naive that I don't even know what to say to you at that point, other than that's just not how reality works. That's not how evil works. The only correct response to evil like that is to annihilate it. This is what happens when evil men are allowed to do whatever they want with no consequences. This is what happens when good men stand by and do nothing. And if you think that's really far away, that wouldn't happen here, think again. Because not only do we have a southern border that's open and people from all over the world are just pouring in through that unchecked, many of whom are military age young men. But since this attack on Israel, and since the footage has come out of the atrocities that are being done to civilians, there's been widespread celebration across our country, across America and the West at large, where they're actively celebrating the atrocities that were just committed. So there's large groups of people all over the country that think that what happened to Israel this weekend is great. Incidentally, Israel has just loosened its gun laws and is encouraging its citizens to get guns and ammo. So that's just something to take note of, because that terrorist attack would have gone very differently if they were going house to house, and in every house they were met with somebody with a gun willing to fight to the death to protect their family. Most of these, if not all of these families that were executed and kidnapped and whatever else, were unarmed. Now, we could get into the theology about whether or not Israel is still God's chosen people, but everything that I've said up till now about the response to terroristic atrocities that we witnessed is not something that there's room for debate on. When we see that, particularly as Christians, that's something that we should be able to unanimously surround and condemn. Not only condemn it, but I would say, particularly since they're a nation that's an ally of the U.S., we should be looking for ways that we can actively assist in stomping it out. Now, as far as Israel still being God's chosen people, that issue isn't really the purpose of this video. I do not think that God goes back on his promises. He made promises to Abraham, to Jacob, to David, things that he would have to go back on if he's no longer considering their descendants his chosen people. We're, as the Gentile church, we're obviously grafted in, but I don't think that there's a completely new plant. I don't think that he destroyed the original plan and just started over with the church. I think that the church is something that's grafted into the promises that still hold true for the nation of Israel. And you can disagree with my theology on that. That's fine. I don't really care. And that's not what this video is about. But where there's no room for disagreement is in our response to the evil that we saw this weekend. We have to stand up. We have to condemn it. And we have to do whatever we can to stomp it out. I'm sure I'll get some hate for this video, and that's fine. A few nasty comments is worth standing up for what's right, and I hope you feel the same. So pray for Israel, pray for the people of Israel, its citizens, the people that are currently kidnapped and being held hostage. Pray for their protection and their safe return. Pray for the thousands of people who are injured and for the thousands of people that are all currently mourning the loss of loved ones. So I hope you'll join me in praying for those things and for standing up for what's right and calling out evil when we see it, and doing whatever we can to be part of the response to that evil.